In the past, Steve Rogers was considered a failure. The boy was weak and frail. He was not responding to any attempts at re-education, and the other children would shun him. It was recommended, for the glory of HYDRA, that the boy be euthanized. Steve Rogers would never amount to anything in this world. In the present, the battle between heroes ends when everyone gets a vision of Miles Morales killing Captain America. This, predictably, leads to an argument between Carol and Tony. Steve, however, sees beyond this bickering. It will do nothing. All you can do is take control of your destiny. Rogers kneels in front of Miles and asks him to get up. This is Spider-Man. That means something to a lot of people. He asks what Miles wants to do, and the young man says he wants to go home. Captain America agrees, and though Carol and the others try and stop them, Doctor Strange teleports the opposing team away from the battle, while Miles flees with Thor. In the past, Rogers escaped from the HYDRA school only to run into a fearsome man who introduced himself as the Kraken. The man explained to Rogers that it's okay to run, it's a very natural instinct. He went on to say that the boy has been brainwashed with American ideals of individualism, but those notions are flawed. The boy saw it for himself. America is filled with poverty, disease. His own father was a failure. But the Kraken believes in a better way, a better world, and a better future. And he owes a debt to Eliza St. Clair, who saw something in Rogers. So he gave the boy a choice. He could come back to HYDRA and prove everyone wrong, that he is destined for greatness, or he could run away. At an old bunker formerly owned by Nick Fury Sr., Steve and Tony have a talk. Everyone is looking at Rogers with sympathy, but he isn't terribly shaken by any of this. He asks Tony if the war is the right way to go, if it's worth it. Tony panics at these words and hopes Rogers isn't switching sides. Them being on the same side for once is really making a difference to Stark. Rogers points out that overstepping civil liberties was never really a problem for Stark before, not during the first Civil War, and again during the incursions. Stark argues that he's trying to atone for what he did, but eventually admits a big part of this has to do with the simple fact that his best friend is dead. Steve points out that if Tony invented something that did what Ulysses could do, he'd be all over it and would probably be fighting on Carol's side for it. Rogers thinks that the real problem is that Stark isn't in charge, and that he can't handle this. This offends Tony, but Rogers doesn't let up. He recognizes a lot of his father in Tony Stark, and doesn't like what he sees. Control issues, mistrust, paranoia, manic behavior. Steve has a question for Stark. When was the last time he had a drink? This really gets to Tony, who leaves incredibly angry, but promises they'll talk about this later. Rogers protests, but in reality, this is exactly what he wanted. With Stark off balance and questioning himself, Rogers has him in the palm of his hands. Meanwhile, Sharon Carter has begun to track down Miles Morales. Rick Jones is able to find him, exactly in the first place they probably should have looked. Rogers then goes to visit Selvig. The Doctor insists that they kill Spider-Man, but Rogers says the best thing for him to do would be to go to DC. Selvig points out that's the worst thing they could possibly do, as it's basically leading to the exact situation the Vision predicted. Rogers replies that while everyone at the battle was paying attention to Spider-Man in the Vision, Rogers was looking elsewhere. He's better trained than that. He looks at the world around him. Spider-Man may very well kill Steve Rogers, but it won't happen tomorrow. Because when it does, it will be worth it. He will die for the glory of HYDRA. Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and this is my recap and review of Captain America Steve Rogers number 6. So I've got to say this was a pretty standard issue overall. Standard in terms of the overall quality I've come to expect out of this series. The art is really solid, while the writing is mostly interesting, though a few parts kind of drag on a little bit. This is especially true in a dialogue-heavy issue like this one, but that doesn't make the comic bad or boring. I just found myself once again not terribly interested in the flashback stuff. I kind of hate flashbacks for this reason. They never seem like they're that critical or important. And I was much more engaged with the stuff in the present. A lot is happening right now in both the world of Civil War and Captain America, and this issue moves things along without any big revelations, but the promise of much more on the way. Gotta admit, this issue kind of improves my opinion of Civil War 2 in general. It's neat seeing how Steve is kinda sitting behind all of this, quietly pulling all these levers to ensure that this became a big deal. That's kinda clever, and I've been enjoying that. Of note is also the ending, which I couldn't find exactly what Steve saw, but it's pretty clear it's going to play out in a big way concerning HYDRA somehow, and possibly content post-Civil War. That's a cool twist, because we've been assuming that the Vision was predicting this big upcoming conflict in DC, but it might not be. I also really like the conversation between Cap and Tony. On the one hand, it starts out kinda touching. We have these two men we know well enjoying a heart-to-heart between friends. But then there's this sinister element that boils up, knowing that Cap is no longer really thinking with their best interests at heart. And the way Steve steers the conversation in a way that will deliberately upset Stark and throw him off was solid writing. And yeah, I still just can't get over how much of this war happened at the hands of Steve Rogers. Really adds something to this story that wasn't there before. That being said, Civil War 2 is kinda getting into mediocre territory for me, but I'm really liking the Captain America stuff still. And I have to say, that's because it's kind of been a different take on things. It's a very fresh aspect of the Civil War idea that I hope gets played up more in the future. The comic gets a solid recommendation for me. It's far from perfect, but I keep wanting to come back for more. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.